Jojen defies videos are purely an individual perception of the corporate world and its professional practice by managers. It is not directed or intended to showcase any individual, organization, or practices of present or past in bad light. It is merely a critic's view of various areas of practices in management. I introduce you all to Jojen Defies, a series which goes on to defies a lot of our management practices versus what we've actually studied in management. Our understanding of our management departments, various functions like sales, marketing, procurement, and support functions like HR, finance have gone on to give an opinion to us what it is actually not. It might seem so that it is true because the prophets of these departments tell us that this is reality, but there seems to be much more than what meets the eye. Reality is far from what it is actually in these departments. I would take you through the series of different departments' evolution and how they've evolved in this by jargons and misdeeds of these people and managers who manage these departments. That's the series beginning with HR or human resources. The journey and evolution of human resources department. The human resources department actually started at the gate. Why do you say that it started at the gate? It's a question that you might be wondering. It started out because those were the days when there was a time and attendance keeper considered to be God, would stand at the gate, give out registers, and people would sign their names and they would walk in. When they walk out, they would sign against their names and walk out. The number of workers increased and became increasingly difficult for the time and attendance manager or the time and attendance clerk, who was considered to be God because he was the person who was letting these people into working. People would come in and they would crowd at the gate. So they devised another method of saying that we'll keep multiple attendance registers so that people would come, sign in and get in. And while they leave, they sign out and get out. Still there existed a lot of crowd at the gate. There were badli workers, there were contract workers, on the job contract people. There were contractors who were trying to push in their people. There were permanent workers, there were temporary workers. There were on-the-job trainees. All these people constituted a lot of people coming and crowding at the gate. So the time and attendance clerk decided to say that, okay, I will put in a tick when people enter and they get out. So there were multiple time and attendance clerk monitoring the people walking in and walking out. For badli workers, they had a different time and attendance clerk. For the permanent workers, they had a different time and attendance clerk. For contract workers, they had a different time and attendance clerk. Thereby, all the time and attendance clerks were considered God because he was the person who was giving them a job every day for the badli workers, and for the rest of the workers, he was the person who was actually letting them in to earn their living. So he slowly attained a halo around him, and people would consider him God. What would the time and attendance clerk do? At the end of the month, he would sit, he would compile the register, take the registers and say that this worker has worked for X number of days, this worker has only worked for Y number of days, and take the entire calculation to the accounts department. The accounts department would calculate per day wages into the number of days worked, and he would say that this is the amount payable to him. They would process that in terms of money, and the salaries were to be disbursed at the gate when the employees were leaving out on a particular day, maybe on the 7th of every month or on the 10th of every month. Whatever the company decided, people would come out against the name, they would sign on a revenue stamp, take the money, count it, and go away. So the time and attendance clerk again maintained the position of God where he was dispersing the salaries of people. Slowly, the time and attendance clerk responsibilities increased, and that's how, if you see, the legacy of HR also has the legacy of HR playing God most of the time, and it happened from the time immemorial when time and attendance was maintained by the clerk. The time and attendance clerk would month on month keep on doing this, and it became very difficult task for him to manage as the company grew and as the number of workers grew. So they bought in something called a time clock, or a card which you could punch into the clock. This card was inserted, so every employee was given a card. This card was taken and inserted into this clock which would punch the time, and the card would be taken back, and the time and attendance clerk kept the card. So every worker or every employee or every contract worker would walk in, would have a card, would insert the card, would have the timing punched in, and would hand over the card to the clerk. The clerk would take it away and bring it back in the evening, again at the gate, so that the employer, the worker, when he's leaving for the day, would have the punch, the card inserted again, and the time punch on the card. End of the month, the time and attendance clerk would compile all the time, much of delay was there, and he would compile it and transfer that data into the accounts. Accounts would again manually calculate and disperse the salary. As the data grew, they had to bring in data processing computers. Those days, those computers were very small, which could just process the number of days, and that data was being handed over to the accounts department, who would work on a tally, or who would have their own software which would process these days. Thereby, the department slowly, from time and attendance, moved into electronic data processing center. Then the job was only to process data. Employee coming in, joining, time and attendance, leave balances, and separating employees. The entire data was being calculated by the electronic data processing center. And from time and attendance, the God moved a little ahead into an EDP center, or electronic data processing center, which was the data center for processing of salaries. The data would flow from the EDP to the accounts, or the payable department, account payments department, and it evolved into being a highly confidential and sophisticated department, because the God had moved from time and attendance to an EDP center. EDP center kept on processing this data, and then the number of workers coming in, the number of workers on the leave, and attendance, and time in and time out started getting more and more complex, and thereby the time and attendance clerk, or the so-called HR god at that time, started saying that, okay, we need separate departments for people who are coming in, we need separate people for training them, we need a separate department for inducting them, we need a separate department for processing the salary, and thereby said, okay, we shall bring all to do with people under the personnel department. They then called anything to do with a human being coming into the organization, his details, his files, his personal files, including his amenities which are being provided, has to be given into a department called the personnel department. So the God moved from time and attendance clerk to an EDP in charge, the electronic data processing center clerk, to a personnel department. And that is how the department started evolving. The more number of workers coming in, with more number of data being complex, the God grew into being a bigger and bigger God. The God had moved from time and attendance to electronic data processing, EDP center, to growing into a larger temple, which is called the personnel department. What is this personnel department? it had various functions to handle. It was doing the hiring. Of course, those days hardly any importance to training. People were all trained on the job by the respective departments. There was a small induction given, saying these are the rules of coming in and going out. These are the days which we work. These are the days you have a leave or a holiday. And then that would cover the induction. There would hardly be any other function which was handled. There was increment, bonus, and promotions which happened on a very small scale. This would be handled directly by the personnel department, by the guard, who used to earlier handle time and attendance. As the number of workers grew, there was a department called welfare department, which would take care of the welfare of the employees. Now, what does this welfare mean? It means canteen, food, uniform, shoes being provided, transport if it was being provided, and a place for them to rest, a restroom, a small canteen, all came under the welfare department. They had some sports and recreation sometimes, and that was the only job what was done by a small function of the personnel department called the welfare department. There was also a small PF department which would handle the PF queries. PF queries usually used to be, how much money is there in my PF account? I want to withdraw the PF amount because my daughter is getting married, my son's getting married, or my renovation of the house. So there's a small unit of the PF department which was handling in-house, which was handling purely the PF. And then of course there used to be trade union activities which was evolving along with the personnel department, and that called for disciplinary action in some cases when there were illegal strikes and people resorting to violence and militancy was creeping into the trade unions. So there used to be a requirement for disciplinary action. Who took care of the disciplinary action? God. The personnel department, or earlier time and attendance keeper, who used to maintain the time, who had access to the personal files and personal details of employees, who knew the employees by the names, and thereby the personnel department became more powerful when disciplinary action was also initiated through the personnel department. The personnel department, or the guard, which was the time and attendance keeper, had become a full-blown god with multi-facets now, called coming out from the personnel department. Till one day the personnel department sat and said, okay, we are dealing with personal files and personal departments, and some genius said that we need to treat them like assets. The people of the company are assets. There was some other genius who countered that by saying that if they are assets, then they need to depreciate. Whereas there has been no depreciation. Year on year, the cost of maintaining an employee is going high. So how can you call it assets? Wondering what to coin these human beings who come into work every day. Workers, it's a bad name. Employees, it's a bad name. But the way they treated continued to be the same, except the jargon started moving into more evolved, saying that okay, they are human capital, they're human assets, and then they zero down on something which is more and more generic, called the human resources, and thereby the personnel department encompassing all the other subdivisions of the welfare, the PF, the ESI, the amenities being provided, the transport department, the labor department being handled, the trade union negotiations, all came under a small function glorified as human resources department. Now, what is human resources department? Why are they called the gods of the organization? They are called gods of the organizations because they play God, because they provide opportunity, they give employment, They can even take away employment. They can sack you, they can fire you, they can call the shots. Thereby, the human resources department became the god of the organization. The gods and petty gods who survived in the department were also known as smaller gods, smaller deities, who manipulated every individual coming in and going out. They had the liberty to play. They had the liberty to play with the careers and lives of providing employment and the careers of workers. The resources had a big name in the department because of the high level of maintenance. Year on year, the maintenance cost went on, going up, and thereby it justified the name of the human resources. But what these gods fail to address is the two areas which needs to be handled evenly, which is the emotional level and the personal level. Personal level or the physical level was handled extremely well because it was a tick mark that needed to be done. Somebody's come in, somebody's gone out, somebody's been selected, somebody's been hired, and there was a tick mark. But where these gods fail to address is the emotional level. Treating the human beings as humanely or treating them as human beings was something which failed to be addressed then and which failed to be addressed even now. So the so-called gods failed in addressing core issues and thus remained a human resource department or a high-risk department or highly rated department in the eyes of the management, but doing little or being little on the humane front and being more on the human front. The humane and humane part of HR department will be addressed in my next video, which encompasses the entire methodology adopted by these business leaders, these HR managers, and managers who are leaders in human resources of addressing human beings as human